Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ancient Warfare Answers, another episode with me, Murray. Oh, look, I changed my word there. This is your weekly fix of ancient warfare related material. And what I do here is I attempt to answer the questions of readers, listeners, and viewers. They send them in to me via email, postcard, by commenting on a previous video or podcast. I get them, I collate them all, and then I try and answer them as best I can. You can back us on Patreon, 3 different levels: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. $1, $5, and $10. $5 gets you a digital copy of the magazine, and $10 gets you a physical copy of the magazine. Now, today's question is from Ralph. Thank you for your question, Ralph. For Murray, he says, what was the least influential weapon on the ancient battlefield? I suggest the Polybolas, available to both successor Macedonian states and Rome. It could have replaced the Scorpio as a legion siege weapon. All right. Okay. So the polybolas, or the polybolos, depending on the pronunciation, means multi-thrower in Greek, was a repeating ballista designed by Dionysius of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. He's a Greek engineer at the Rhodes Arsenal. Not a crossbow, because it uses a torsion mechanism and it's drawing its power from the twisted sinew bundles of its string. And we get several descriptions of it. It doesn't tend to do a great deal, hence Ralph's chagrin and dismissal of it as the least influential weapon on the battlefield. Now, I'm going to be controversial, which is rare for me. I don't like being controversial. I'm going to say that I think the least successful or the least influential weapon on the ancient battlefield is, in fact, the elephant. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about Greek and Roman battles, not so much in ancient India, where they are far more influential. But I think the interesting thing about the elephant is that when they're encountered by Alexander in his Indian campaigns, and then brings them back into Western warfare and in North African warfare, they are built up to be this tower in the wall of shields and spears, this weapon that's terrifying, that will, trample the enemy and destroy the enemy. And amazingly, they are always not useless. Heraclium in 280 BC, they seem to be the thing that turns the battle in Pyrrhus's favor, for instance. And he's brought elephants across from Epirus into Italy with him. But the problem is that when you look at them, on those rare occasions where they do any good, there are so many occasions where they get terrified and start trampling your own troops. And even Pyrrhus probably dies because one of his largest elephant gets stuck in the gateway at Argos, and he isn't able to escape and ends up dying in the melee. But other accounts of battles where the elephants are turned back on their own men, which they trample in a sort of a red blood haze. So in that sense, they're like, oh, is it worth that risk? And I think when you look at elephants, they are present in warfare for such a vast span of time. So, again, at the end of the Roman Empire in the 4th century AD, they're coming up against Sasanian Persian elephants who have maintained elephant corps for a very long period of time. And you're like, well, this is crazy, because you've got elephants which seem to not be particularly useful on the battlefield being maintained. And they must have been expensive to train. They must have been expensive to keep fed and watered. And, they remain much more miss than hit. So in that sense, they are maybe there for appearance sakes, because they never seem to deliver what they're there to deliver. And so I think in that sense, they're least influential. But again, you could easily say, but they're influential. And my favorite discussion of elephants is Ammianus Marcellinus, who seems to have a fear of elephants. And, he talks about how horrible they smell and how terrible they look, and he calls them monsters. And it would seem that at some point in the siege of Nisibis, probably in the 350s AD, Ammianus has had some kind of close encounter with an elephant. Now, we don't get his account of the close encounter. His history doesn't survive. His later history, which does survive, he refers back to how horrible elephants are and how monstrous they are and how disgusting they are and how he hates them. So something happened in his earlier narrative before his history is lost. Probably, I mean, we have his history from 353 onwards, so probably it happens in the Siege of Nisibis in 350, which from other accounts we know elephants are involved in. And, they're trying to take the wall down, and they're being felled, as they always seem to be felled, by people with large amounts of missiles. So they stay around in warfare for a very long time and never seem to live up to their reputation. But they are there. So I suppose you could argue that that's, influential of a kind. If I was going to say for another one, which is a bit more ubiquitous in the popular imagination than it probably was on the actual battlefield, it's the scythed chariot, whether it's Ben-Hur or other depictions of these terrifying weapons, the movie Gladiator. Scythed chariots are this, oh my gosh, what do we do about them? Whereas in actual battles, they don't ever seem to be quite as effective as they're described. And again, are they a terror weapon? The Battle of Gaugamela, we get the description of that there's chariots in the front lines of the Persians. They've flattened the battlefield specifically so they can be there. Then when the battle starts, they don't get mentioned at all. And you're like, where did they go? Or they do get mentioned, and we're told that the Macedonians and Alexander design a tactic whereby they open up a channel through the phalanx for them to charge, and they don't do any good. Similarly, we get the Battle of Cunaxa, where there are chariots there, and we're told that the Greek mercenary force doesn't suffer a single casualty in that battle, even though they're on the losing side. And there is one account of a single peltast who is run over by a chariot, but he emerges unscathed from his encounter with a chariot. So in that sense, you've got a weapon which is designed to terrify, which doesn't seem to terrify anybody. And again, though, the interesting thing is chariots come back, and we have the anonymous De Rebus Bellicus at the end of the 4th century AD saying we should bring scythed chariots back. So there's this perpetuation of all scythed chariots, and the impact that they would have is interesting. We're still not sure, because most chariots that we find in the ancient world are quite. They're either archery platforms or they're the battle taxi, which is a controversial take on what the role of the chariot was. But the idea that they're an impact weapon doesn't ever seem to have been the case. We do have some chariots in Indian warfare, and Hittite warfare, for instance, had 3-man chariots, not 2-man chariots. But in most cases, they seem to be a platform from which to fire missiles rather than charge through the enemy kind of weapon. Even though obviously that's what a scythed chariot is for, but they're vulnerable. The horses are vulnerable, the rider, the driver is vulnerable. And so they're not ever as influential as they have been made out to be in popular imagination. The scene from Gladiator is recurring to my mind of, oh no, well, step to the right and you're not going to get cut off at the legs. So anyway, I think therefore those would probably be my 2 least influential weapons on the ancient battlefield: the scythed chariot and the elephant. Of course, you can disagree, and so if you do and you have your own idea, please put it in the comments and we can have a discussion about it. But join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.